Many companies come to us asking which type of CMS is right for them. Choosing the right CMS as an organization can be a really tall task because not only are there tons of different CMS brands, but there's also different CMS categories and approaches. And in this video, I'm going to give you the pros and cons of each type of approach. The types of CMSs that we're going to be covering are traditional open source CMSs, digital experience platforms, and headless CMSs. And this video is also going to be a bit of a history lesson because traditional open source CMSs were the first type of CMSs on the block. Digital experience platforms were a response to them, and then headless CMSs were a response to digital experience platforms. So we're going to be covering a little bit of history as to why each of these platforms were created the way they were. But let's first start with traditional open source CMSs. So a traditional CMS typically refers to the WordPresses of the world or the Drupals or the Joomlas. They have WYSIWYG content editors, backend content repositories, and they are typically open source and free of charge. And I like to think of a traditional CMS as a website in a box, where in this box, in this WordPress box, you have your front end, which your developers create. That's what the appearance of your website looks like. You have the CMS portion, which is responsible for producing and publishing content to your website. And then you have your database, which stores all this content. And so when you sign up for WordPress or create a website using WordPress, you have all these things in a box. And then all you have to do is connect all these things in a box to a hosting provider, and you can then bring your website online. And there's a lot of benefits to traditional CMSs. First, the platform can be free. So it's made at a price point that is accessible to almost anybody. Second is there's an extensive ecosystem of plugins and integrations. Basically, since the platform is open source, anybody can create integrations or plugins. And so you just see a massive community of people who have created all these integrations and plugins. The third benefit is it supports varying levels of website scale. You have your mom and pop restaurants, which are hosted on WordPress, as well as very large organizations who have the resources to build out a website in WordPress or a traditional CMS. And then lastly, this type of platform is very familiar to designers, marketers, and developers. I mean, almost anybody in tech has had some sort of interaction with WordPress. So hiring these resources for your WordPress website is super easy and affordable. But this does come with some drawbacks. First and foremost is a lot of WordPress websites suffer from code bloat, performance issues, and security risks. And the reason why is because there's so many different types of plugins that you can add to your website. We see a lot of organizations add a lot of plugins, and each of these plugins act as an extra script running on your website. And so what ends up happening is these WordPress and traditional open source CMSs have all these plugins, which adds all these scripts, and it will drastically reduce the site speed and create a lot of performance issues. These plugins also create a lot of security vulnerabilities because anybody can create a plugin for these websites, right? And so there's no governing organization to say, hey, this plugin is safe to use. And so you can install a plugin to your website that creates a security vulnerability. That's why most of the websites that are hacked today are typically on WordPress or a traditional CMS, and they're typically hacked through methods where they downloaded a plugin that was unsecure. The second drawback is there are overhead costs to maintain the website. For instance, if you want to upgrade from WordPress 10.1 to 10.2, well, you're going to need a developer to do that for you. So it's not a platform where you can just live without a development team or an engineering team. You're going to constantly need some form of development support. The third drawback is most technical or technology forward organizations view traditional CMSs as outdated technologies. This platform and these platforms were created decades and decades and decades ago. And so the needs of the platforms from decades ago do not necessarily align with the needs today. And so a lot of a lot of technology forward organizations just view this type of CMS as outdated technology. And then another big drawback is there is limited design and content customization. And so if you want to create anything custom inside of WordPress, well, you're going to need an engineering team to do that for you. Or if you want to redesign your website, you're likely going to have to build your website from scratch and use an engineering team in order to get that build done. So there's not a lot of design, optimization and customization that can be done without the use of very technical resources. And then lastly, a big drawback is there's no native hosting. So once you have your website, you're going to have to pay to host it. And you can use cheap hosting providers, but they often provide some security vulnerabilities. Or you can use expensive hosting providers, but now you're paying a lot of money to host the website, right? So what was once free is now a costly thing to have. And so there was a market response to these WordPresses of the world that have all these plugins. And it was digital experience platforms. And digital experience platforms, also known as DXPs, are composed of integrated set of core technologies that support the creation, management, and delivery of omni-channel experiences. And essentially, if a traditional CMS or a WordPress is a website in a box, then a DXP is a website in a box and everything else, plus the kitchen sink to run your digital experience. So it's kind of a very large package of features that organizations purchase. So that way they don't have to download plugins or anything like that. And these platforms come with a lot of benefits. First and foremost is there's fewer tools to manage, right? So with your DXP, you're essentially purchasing your whole digital experience. So that's not only your website, but that's also your email marketing, that's your analytics, your A/B testing. You're all purchasing it from a single vendor. And so you don't have to manage the integrations of a bunch of tools or anything like that. You're just purchasing one set of tools from one vendor. The second value add is it comes with a very large feature set. So all of your MarTech is coming from a single vendor, but because it has kind of so many features, like a lot of these DXP platforms are in a feature sort of race where they just want to create features. What you end up purchasing is often quantity over quality. So rather than the best email marketing platform in the world, you're purchasing kind of a mediocre email marketing platform, but it integrates well with your website. And that kind of leads us to a third point, which is tight platform integration. All of the features and tools that are created in a DXP natively integrate with one another tool. So that way you can get up and running very quickly and not have to use any sort of dev services to create integrations. And then lastly, this is a big one for CIOs. Essentially, there's less procurement, right? So you have a single vendor to purchase from, and essentially one, quote unquote, throat to choke, so to speak, right? So you have less procurement. It's much easier to add in tools into your digital experience since you're just working with the single vendor. But these platforms also come with a lot of drawbacks. One of them is they're really expensive. And most of the tools you end up purchasing sit shelfware. So when you use a DXP, you purchase all these tools, you pay a lot of money for these tools, but some of these tools get implemented and other of these tools do not. And essentially you often end up having tools that you just don't use because you haven't implemented them, right? It's something that I see a lot of organizations kind of deal with and have difficulty with their DXP choices because of. The second issue is vendor lock-in. Once you're in a DXP ecosystem, it is really, really hard to get out of the vendor ecosystem or the DXP ecosystem. Essentially, all these tools are designed to work with each other and rarely work with third-party tools. So say you want to trade in your DXP analytics tool for, a modern tool like Mixpanel or Amplitude. Well, these DXPs make it so that you can't integrate these new tools into their DXP platform. They don't want that, right? They don't want you using any other tools. And so what you often have is just a real case of vendor lock-in where you can't use any tools outside of the DXP with the DXP. And then the third drawback, and probably the most important, is there's a large engineering burden. So I've seen some implementations take 3 or 4 years, and then they also need sort of ongoing support in order to maintain the DXP. And people who are familiar with DXPs are often specialists, and so they're really expensive to hire, employ, and contract. And so there's just a lot of engineering burden. And as a CIO or a leader, you need to have a lot of resources available in order to implement a DXP and keep it maintained. And then the fourth drawback is marketing often lacks the flexibility and speed that they need. Essentially, a lot of the organizations that I work with, when they have a DXP in place, I'll talk to their marketing folks. And rather than being able to just release a page in a day or something like that, marketing people often have to wait 3 to 4 weeks to release a page, right? Because they have to come up with the idea, they have to pass it off to engineering to build, then they have to test it, then they have to make modifications to it, and then they have to make sure that all the integrations work correctly, right? And so these DXPs are really not a marketing first sort of platform, and really prevent marketers from having the speed and flexibility they need to do their job well. And then the last piece, which kind of goes hand in hand with vendor lock-in, is you have to pay extra for your data consumption. So if you want to get your data out of the DXP into a data warehouse, it's going to be pretty complicated, and the DXP is going to charge you a lot of money. And the reason for that is because the DXP does not want you to have the data in your data warehouse, because if you have the data in your data warehouse, then you can easily use other tools. So these tools and platforms make you pay extra for data consumption, so that way you stay locked into the platform. And then the response to the DXP platforms and being, expensive and organizations having to suffer from vendor lock-in was a headless CMS, which a headless CMS is a back-end only web content management system that acts primarily as a content repository. The headless CMS makes content accessible via the API to display on any device without any sort of built-in front-end or presentation layer. And so the right way to think about this is, with a headless CMS, you have your CMS, which has a content database. And then you have a set of APIs, and those set of APIs can transmit the content to your front ends. So this could be your website, your mobile app, your on-prem displays. It could also be your AR, VR tools. It can also send this data to various hosting providers, and then also send the data to various other tools as well. But a headless CMS is really just like that sort of CMS in a box that then is connected to a layer of APIs that can transmit the data to where it needs to go. And there's a lot of benefits to this. First, headless exploded on the scene because it's really flexible and gives developers a lot of control. So they can really build out whatever sort of front end that they like. If you can dream it, you can build it with headless. The limit really does not exist. It also created safe and guardrailed environments for marketing. So marketers can do their job and release an update on a certain platform without running into any sort of difficulties of making mistakes on other platforms or having a botched release. As a developer, when developing and implementing headless, you can create just safe, guardrailed environments for marketers to do marketing and not really make any mistakes that impact any other parts of your business. The third benefit is headless CMSs support omni-channel experiences. So you can definitely present to your website. You can present to AR, VR. You can present to your on-prem displays. I mean, you can present the data wherever you want. It can be there. You just have to build out the layer and the integration to get it there. And then kind of the main response to DXPs is that it's just highly extensible and composable. You can use whatever tool that you want. You can integrate it with your headless CMS because at its core, it's just a set of APIs. So it gives you the ability to use all the best tools in each category, right? So for analytics, you can use Mixpanel and Amplitude. For A/B testing, you can use tools like Optimizely. For email marketing, you can use the Brazes and the Iterables, and they all integrate well with the headless CMS because the headless CMS is just a set of APIs. But the headless CMS does have some major drawbacks. One of them is you're fully reliant on engineering and it is very expensive to build. Essentially, when you're using a headless CMS, you're starting out from zero. So rather than having any theme or anything to build your website on, you literally have to code that website from the ground up. And then if you want to make any sort of design changes or add in new content, you also have to use engineering in order to do that. And so the organizations that use headless CMSs often have a lot of engineering resources at their disposal. The second drawback is very long implementations, ongoing support, and complex middleware maintenance. Essentially, you can architect whatever you want, you can build whatever you want, but the implementation timeline is generally very long. On some of the implementations that we have done in Headless, they've lasted anywhere from 14 to 16 months, like just very, very long. The nice part is you get to build whatever you want, but it just takes a long time to do so. And one of the things that you kind of also start to develop is if you have any sort of system integrator or agency build out your headless CMS implementation, then you are likely going to be vendor locked into that agency or SI simply just because they're going to have so much internal knowledge about how everything is built and how the APIs are connected. The third drawback is it is inaccessible and limited UX for marketing. Essentially, there is no sort of preview functionality with Headless. So if you, as a marketer, want to build a page and then see what it looks like in Headless, you're not going to be able to do that simply just because Headless is just a set of APIs. They haven't built any sort of presentation layer there. And then lastly, it kind of falls in line, or the previous point falls in line with this, which is marketing lacks flexibility and speed. So if they want to, implement a new marketing initiative, well, then they're going to have to involve engineering, QA, the whole team in order to get these sort of ideas built out. So Headless in a lot of ways is not meant for marketers. It's mostly meant for teams that have just a much more stronger engineering presence because it gives all the power to the engineering team and very little power to marketing team. So I hope this video was helpful. Those are the 3 types of CMSs. And if you need any sort of recommendations on what type of CMS to use for your business, you can contact me in the description below. I hope this video is helpful.